Zikrona Livracha, and a very special welcome to Orly. The crowd here tonight is surely a testimony to the woman that Esther was. I have no doubt that Esther, together with her husband, Yehuda, are looking down with a bright smile. Everyone that knew Esther would most probably describe her as a gentle, sweet soul. She did what had to be done in a quiet and humble fashion. But the thing that stands out most to me is her beautiful, infectious smile. You would rarely know if anything was wrong, since she wore a smile all the time. Many people have a custom at the end of the Amidah prayer to insert a verse from the Torah that begins and ends with the letters of their Hebrew name. The verse, so I looked up what verse would be for Esther. And the verse that corresponds with her name is from Tehillim, from Psalms. And I found this to be true Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, since Esther had a strong passion with reciting Tehillim. Almost always she could be found with the Tehillim in her hand. And so this verse is from chapter 20 in Tehillim, and it says like this, and I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate it. Eila barechem v'eila basusim v'anachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu nazkir. Some rely upon chariots, some upon horses, but we rely upon and invoke the name of the Lord our God. I would like to take this a step further. Some rely on fanfare and commotion, but there are those that simply and modestly rely upon and invoke the name of Hashem. This was Esther. There was never any tumult with her. In fact, she despised the limelight. She would blush at the slightest bit of attention. We were looking for pictures of her, and we had a hard time finding because she was always shy of the camera. Esther was an extremely dedicated wife and mother. While her husband was going through his illness, she was at his side constantly, schlepping around wherever she had to, and all the while encouraging the family and strengthening their Yiddishkeit. I'd like to ask my husband, Rabbi Yossi Kahana, founder and director of Chabad of Northeast Florida, to come up and share a few words.
Was it closer to me? A lot has been said over the last few weeks with regard to Esther and Yosef, Ohayon, and a lot more will be said tonight and for weeks and months to come. I want to talk about Esther from a different perspective. To me, and I said this around Yom Kippur, I didn't have this crowd quite. A few of you weren't here. Esther was a martyr, a kadosh. Why? So you ask the question, why was she a martyr? Because she was a Jewish woman who was taken by God on her way to do a big mitzvah on the holiest day of the year. When I said this, people come to me and ask me, Doesn't the definition of a martyr mean somebody who has to willingly give their life for God? Who has to be given a choice? Yaharod val yavor. Do this or serve an idol, or else you'll be killed and decide to choose to be killed. The answer is absolutely not. That is incorrect. In fact, we consider all the martyrs of the Holocaust Kedoshim, martyrs, even though they didn't necessarily choose so, and many of them would have denounced their Judaism if they can get away with it. Nevertheless, they didn't choose martyrdom. Martyrdom chose them. You need not look any further than the original Kedoshim. Who are the original Kedoshim? The original martyrs. Goes back to a biblical story. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, who, in a moment of climactic holiness and spirituality, in a time when everyone was looking forward to this great moment of God's revelation, when they dedicated the temple, on the 8th day of the dedication of the temple. There were 7 days of practice where they went through the routines over and over. And on the 8th day, it says they did it for real. It was a real time. And Vayered Pred Hashem, and God's presence came down into the Beis HaMikdash for the first time. Imagine the euphoria that took place at that moment. At that very moment, tragedy struck. Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, were burnt up in a fire that came out from God. Who can understand this? How can you understand this? Moshe says to Aaron was probably not feeling very good at the moment, probably in a state of hysteria. He says to him, Hu Hashem Diber Hashem. This is what God said. V'kroi vayei kodesh. With those who are close to me, I will sanctify myself. V'alpnei kol ha'am ekoved. And I will derive my honor from all the people. Nadav and Avihu did not volunteer. They were voluntold. Hashem, there's an interesting Rashi there. Rashi says, Moshe says to Aaron, I knew they were great, but I didn't know they were quite that great. That God chose them to sanctify himself with, as opposed to us. Looking for perspective on tragedy, communal tragedy, on Esther. Hu Asher Diber. If we knew that Esther was great, we know it more so now that Hashem chose her to be his Kravai. If those who are close to me, I will sanctify myself. God took her to himself because she was close to him. That's literal interpretation. I'm not making this up. There's a literal interpretation of the verse, the story of the sons of Aaron. That's what Vayida, and the Torah says, Vayida Aaron. Aaron remained silent. He had no words. All the questions were answered. V'kroi vayei kodesh. With those who are close to me, I sanctify myself. Esther is in a good place right now. Where are we? King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, "V'hachai yiten al liboi," and the living shall take to heart. We have to analyze and do a cheshbon hanefesh, a reckoning of the soul when something like this happens. Whenever, any time somebody passes away, the living have to take into consideration the ramifications of what this means. Life is fragile. Life is short. You're here today, you're gone tomorrow. You are obligated to take a lesson from the death of a close one in your own way of serving God. But it's more than that. That's in an individual situation. In a communal situation, which is clearly a community tragedy because you can see just by the people in the room. No one pronounced it a community tragedy. It is by its own volition a community tragedy. And the Rambam says, you're not allowed to say, when it comes to a tragedy with regards to Am Yisrael, you're not allowed to say, mikra nikra. This is a happenstance. This is a coincidence. This is not a coincidence. God did this for a purpose. And it's for us. It's for us to search our hearts and our souls, to ask ourselves, why? What did God want to tell us with this? Why Jacksonville? Why Erev Yom Kippur? Erev Kippur. Are you talking about already beginning of Yom Kippur? The holiest day of the year. There's so many similarities to the story of another Avihu. The highest moment of holiness. The holiest day of the year. Going to shul. Going to Kol Nidre. This is not something that you can just ignore. It's not nikra nikra. This is clearly not a coincidence. Had she gone to the street corner a minute later, imagine the timing that had to take place. You can't deny God's hand in this. 1 minute later or 2 minutes earlier, so this tragedy would have been avoided. The timing had to be synchronized perfectly. Who synchronized this timing? And why? Because God wanted to teach us something, and He took the one who was close to Him. And now we know, as Moshe said to Aaron, now we know how great your sons were. Now we know how great Esther was. Because God chose her, of all people, to bring the message. What is the message? If there's no message, then God forbid, it's all for waste. We must resolve to walk away from this with a message. And then, we're pluralistic. We all have our own ideas. Ein dayasei and shabbos. One of the beautiful things about humanity is that they don't think alike. Because if two people sort of alike, then one brain would be extra. So we all have our own brains and our own ways of thinking. And I'm not going to try to impose my particular opinion about anybody else. I just ask that we don't let this pass by. That of all places in the world, God chose Jacksonville, Florida, on Yom Kippur Eve, during Kol Nidre, to take the life of a woman who was going to shul to do a mitzvah. For myself, there's a lesson for this community. Esther stood for shalom. Her husband's name was Shalom. If anything, she was a woman of peace. Much more than that, but again, people will talk about her greatness. I know personally she avoided shul politics like the plague. They don't want to be political. She was not interested in politics. Religion to her was not about political jockeying. And for myself, I will draw the message from her that as a community, we should search our souls with regards to Avas Yisrael and Achos Yisrael. This hit home. This is in our backyard. How much clearer could God be? We need to unite. We need to become closer as Jews and find our commonalities versus our differences. And I think this would be the greatest attribute we can give Esther. If we can just resolve tonight that we're going to become more loving, and more tolerant, and more accepting of another Jew, regardless if he is of my persuasion or of somebody else's persuasion. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And we have to take this to heart. We can't let the voices of divisiveness rule the day. There are, in every synagogue and Jewish organization, you have the spiritual leadership and you have the secular leadership. And the secular leadership is very good, it's very important, they bring the dough. But they don't understand necessarily the nature of Yiddishkeit. Jews do not turn against each other. This is the oldest code of Judaism. So not to be long, I would like to propose that in honor of Esther, we all take it upon ourselves to be kinder, more tolerant, more accepting of a Jew who is not necessarily of our particular way of thinking. To love a Jew because he's a Jew. You don't have to agree with everything. I'm not talking about agreement. But the love for a Jew, it goes beyond the specifics of his beliefs, character. And maybe we should have one day a year, because how beautiful this is. We have a crowd here tonight from a cross-section of the community. Why do we have to wait for a tragedy for this to happen? Why can't we have one day a year, at least, where the community comes together as a community in honor of Esther and just gets together for the sake of getting together? Esther's Day. They are doing so at least one day a year, coming together as Jews. Jews without borders. Jews without borders. We're Jews. We're Jews. We're brothers. We're sisters. That's more important than anything else. By doing so, we will hasten the coming of Mashiach. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Kahana. Esther than the descriptions already mentioned. As I was preparing my notes for this evening, many ideas and examples came to mind, but I was struggling to find the proper adjective. That was until this past Friday night at our Chabad table. During one of the discussions we had, the concept of bittul, self-abnegation, came up. And that's when it hit me. This was the word I was looking for. Esther was the model of bittul, self-abnegation, selflessness. She was constantly giving up of herself for the sake of others and for the sake of Hashem. When the family started becoming Shomer Shabbos, the Ohayons lived around 4 miles away. Every Friday, Esther would bring by the shul a fresh change of clothing, and on Shabbos morning, the whole family would make the trek. The strange thing was that despite their hour walk, they were always the first ones in shul. Esther was the driving force in their renewed commitment to Jewish observance. And on most Fridays, anonymous packages of drinks, fruit, vegetables, and other groceries would show up either at the Chabad center or by my front door. We didn't know who it was for a while, and then we finally figured out who the culprit was. Esther had a difficult time asking for things. She preferred to be on the giving end. When the holidays came around, we invited her family to stay with us. She really wasn't comfortable with this. She didn't want to impose on our family. Thank God our house was full, and she knew we would meet. We would have to take our kids out of their beds and bring them into our room and so on. But she ultimately acquiesced and put aside her feelings and reservations for the sake of her family's Yiddishkeit. Yes, that was Esther, always putting herself aside. I would like to ask Rabbi Yaakov Fish of Eitz Chaim to please come up and share some words.
Past Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippur we'll never forget. Yom Kippur that will be etched in our memories forever. I'm used to speaking without a mic, so it's okay. Past Yom Kippur was a Yom Kippur we'll never forget. A Yom Kippur that seared into our memory with the horrible tragedy that took place in our community with the taking of a very righteous and holy person. Esther Ohayon was taken into the world of truth. As Rabbi Kahana mentioned,
The Rambam, the Maimonides, says that when a tragedy occurs, we shall not say that it's a mikra, it's a coincidence. If you say it's a coincidence, then you've missed the message. If you say it's a coincidence, you've missed the message. Who knows what the message is? I'm not a prophet, not a Navi. I don't know, can't tell you what a prophet would have said. Sometimes we read the Nevi'im, we read the words of the prophets, and it would be nice to have Eliyahu Hanavi here tell us exactly why this occurred. But as Rabbi Kahanov said, we have to look inward. It's sometimes too easy to point fingers at each other and say and view the shortcomings of others. Especially as Jews, we sometimes have a tendency to do that. But we have to realize, just as the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago because of sinas chinam, because Jews did not respect each other adequately. Other tragedies occur, and there's this state of hester panim, concealment of God's face, sometimes, because we don't treat each other respectfully. And who knows the reason why Esther was taken on the holiest day of the year. What we do know is that she was a kadosh, a holy person. But as far as we're concerned, we must look inward, not outwards. We must look inward and ask ourselves, how can we improve ourselves? What can I do to be a better human being? What can I do to be a better Jew? How can I treat someone else more respectfully? How can I reduce the lashon hara, the ill talk that I speak of others? How can I go ahead and bring some joy and simcha to somebody else in life? How can I go ahead and increase ahavas Yisrael, increase loving a fellow Jew? V'ahavta l'reach hakamocha, you shall love your fellow neighbor like yourselves. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, said Rabbi Akiva. That's a great lesson of the Torah. It's not just rhetoric. It's a great lesson of the Torah. We must take that to heart. I want to reference also a Rashi of Parshas Noach that we just read. Iker maisim, iker tolosem shel tzadikim maisim tova. The true legacy of the righteous are the good deeds that they achieve in their life. Esther was a woman that personified chesed, kindness. She exuded simcha, and she had great emunah. And if you want to see the legacy of Esther today, I just look to my right over here. When I look at her children, Ilana, Simi, Michael, and Orly, that the values that Esther lived with are still here today with her children. Though I did not have the pleasure of knowing her husband Yehuda Zichrono Livracha, but that is his legacy as well. So we look to them when we see Esther and her husband Yehuda in this world, and we see her ma'asim tov and her good deeds. And I just want to mention one thing else about Orly. Orly is here, and it's great to see you, Orly. Nothing can stop you. This past Friday, I was in Shands visiting somebody else. And I was walking down the hall, and this doctor called me, and she said, Rabbi Fish. I looked up and I saw Dr. Northcutt, one of the physicians that took care of Orly when she got into the hospital. And she says, it's unfathomable how Orly survived and how well she's doing. Judging on how the accident occurred, it's unfathomable how she survived and how well she's doing. It was a miracle. We must take note of the tragedy, but we must take note of the miracle. Orly survived that accident. And Orly is a giant among her siblings. She's a giant that inspired Jews around the world to come together at the Kotel and daven for her, and people davening for her, and people learning Torah for her, and people separating challah for her. Orly, nothing can stop you. Michael, Ilana, and Simi, keep on going with this great legacy that your parents taught you. That will be the greatest tribute to them. And we must follow the path of Esther with her emunah, with her faith, with her chesed, and with her simcha. If we continue to follow that derech of faith, kindness, and loving a fellow Jew, her memory will always be perpetuated and live on forever. Yehi zichra baruch. May her memory be a blessing for us all.
For those inspiring words. As Esther was advancing in her Judaism, we began discussing the mitzvah of Taharat HaMishpacha, mikvah. She didn't feel quite ready for this. I was waiting for the right occasion to broach the subject again, and as it turns out, a short while later, that Pesach, my brother and sister-in-law were visiting us from Israel. And during Yom Tov, we planned for my sister-in-law to give a class for women. I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to bring up the subject of mikvah, as it might be just the push Esther and maybe some other women needed. Baruch Hashem, it worked. Shortly afterward, Esther approached me and told me that she was indeed ready to begin learning more. Several months after she began using the mikvah, she came to tell me some good news. Rifki, I won't be needing to go to the mikvah for a while. Hashem has blessed me. I'm pregnant. This, as I'm sure you can imagine, was great news. For me, it took on also a personal nature, because a short while later, I too got pregnant. And with our daughters being born around 6 weeks apart, we had lots to share. And indeed, her daughter, Orly, my light, has been a tremendous bracha and light for her, as well as for all that know her. May you, Orly, Mas Esther, have a refuah shalema, a true and complete recovery. May you continue to grow from strength to strength. Mechayel el chayel. Esther was very diligent with performing this mitzvah. It really meant a lot to her. I even remember one evening when it was her mikvah night, and she spent the whole day with her husband, doctor appointments, one after the next, and she came home really late in the evening. And many women at that point might have called a rabbi, and specifically to this mitzvah, we have decided to dedicate one of the preparation rooms of the Jacksonville Community Mitzvah in her loving memory. We have a plaque here that we will hang up, and it says, "This preparation room is dedicated in loving memory of Esther Bas Yosef, Ohayon." Rabbi of the Jacksonville Jewish Center, to please come up and share some words.
I want to say thank you to Rabbi Kahanoff and also to Rabbi Fish for their remarks thus far. Sukkah. That too was Esther Day. And may we have many more. Once a year is good, but more than once a year is better. We all know that there are times in life where we say the bracha Dayan Hanet. We acknowledge God as the righteous judge. There are things that happen beyond our understanding. We are not the ones ultimately in control. And there are other times when we say the bracha that ends with Hatov HaMeitiv, when we hear good news. When we are blessed with the gift of learning something positive. The most difficult moments in life are the ones where the two meet on a narrow edge, a razor-thin margin. And look at Orly. I have to say, Mishmalach Kol Tov, Mishmalach Kol Tov Selah. Hatov HaMeitiv. But also, as we think of Esther, Dayan Hanet. The Midrash of Yalkut Shimoni teaches Shekol HaMoadim Atugim Livatel V'Yemei HaPurim Einan B'Telim La'olam. In the world to come, all festivals will be abolished except Purim. To which Rabbi Elazar remarks, Af Yom HaKippurim lo yivatel le'olam. Shene'amar v'haita zot lachem lechukat olam. Yom Kippur will also never be abolished, as the Torah teaches. This in the Yonatan HaTokef, the most important line is not about what we're not in control, but it's Utshuva Tfilah Tzedakah Ma'avirin et Roah HaGzerah. But repentance, prayer, and righteous acts can Ma'avirin et Roah HaGzerah. And Ma'avirim doesn't mean annul. That would be Mavtilim. And it doesn't mean remove. That would be Masirim. It is Ma'avirim to transfer, or maybe even better yet, to transform the severe decree. Because by leading a life of Menschlichkeit, we do not evade destiny. Because we never evade destiny. But we assure that the life we lead has mattered, has touched others. We have left the world a better place. And this is what Mordechai and Esther had in mind. When Mordechai confronted Esther's initial reluctance to intervene with Achashverosh, when he said to her, do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, Revach v'hatzalah yamod la'Yehudim mimakom acher, ve'at uvet avich tovedu, mi yodea, im la'et kazot higat la'malchut. Relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you have attained your royal position for just such a crisis. If our Malkat Esther, our Esther Ohayon, could have foreseen the burden she would bear, the challenges she would face as a widow, as a single parent, she would have done nothing but be the person that she was. She would still have chosen to be the loving, sweet, and caring individual that she was. She was a woman who walked with tzniut and modesty, loved her family and her children. And when I say her children, that means her own, but those entrusted to her care each day as a preschool teacher in Martin J. Gottlieb Day School. Not one iota of her character would have been different. Masechet Megillah, the Talmud observes that Esther was also known as Hadassah because myrtle is a symbol of righteousness. Like the Hadassim we use on Sukkot, Esther performed mitzvot. And to use the phrase of the Gemara, the chut shel chesed mashuch aleh, she was imbued with a thread of kindness that made her beautiful to others. The Gemara is talking about the biblical Esther, but its descriptive term also captures our community's Esther, who in these ways embodied her namesake. I knew Esther as the rabbi of the center, whose gentle and smiling presence was a balm to the soul of adult and child alike. And the very last words that I exchanged with her the day before her death was visiting her classroom and talking to the children in her class about Yom Kippur and asking for slicha, granting it. And I said to all the children, please ask Miss Esther for forgiveness. And they all did. And she smiled. She always is a little bit not wanting to be in the spotlight. And she said, of course I forgive you. There's nothing to forgive, but if there were, I still forgive you. That was the last thing I heard her say. I knew Esther as the teacher of our twins, Elior and Itamar, who recall the patience, kindness, and caring presence of her as their preschool teacher. And I realized, not before Rabbi Kahanov had said what her pasuk was from Psalm 20, that also happens to be the same pasuk for Elior and Itamar. There's so many countless others whose lives have been touched by Esther's. Whether it's a child or grandchild, a colleague, a student, a neighbor, a friend. Who could capture her essence with 100 tributes? But her memory and the values she embraced throughout her life bring us a measure of comfort as we preserve her legacy by trying to embody her values in our deeds. Toward the end of the Megillah, we read, U'ma'amar Esther Kayam Divrei Purim Ha'eleh V'nechtav B'Sefer. And I'm going to translate this with a little bit of leeway. All of Esther's life, all of her teachings, all that she stood for shall remain established, despite the Purim of our uncertain destiny, despite never knowing what tomorrow will bring. She will live on, Nichtav B'Sefer, written into the book of our lives, recorded on the scroll of our days. Vayehav HaMelech et Esther mikol hanashim. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. It's not difficult to understand why our Melech Malchei HaMelchim, the sovereign of all sovereigns, would have loved Esther for all of her righteous attributes. And we dare do no less, loving her for everything that she stood for, everything that she has given us. Yehi zichra lebracha. Her memory shall always be for a blessing.
you, Reverend Zener. Eventually, the Ohayons moved into the neighborhood, and immediately their house became the place for many to visit on Shabbat afternoons. It was the new hot spot. Everyone always felt welcome in their home. My children always wanted to spend time in their house. People always commented about their hachnasas orchim, their hospitality, and open home, which never stopped. And actually, this Yom Kippur, there were people scheduled to spend Yom Kippur in Esther's home. For the past 8 years, Esther has been a teacher at the Dubois preschool. I'd like to ask Shireen Kennedy, director of the preschool, to please come up and share some words.
We all loved Esther. We all love Esther. And we all miss Esther. We in the preschool and in the Jewish community have had a rough few weeks. Losing Esther and the ripple effects have been extremely sad and very difficult. John Mitzmacher, the head of the Golinsky Academy, could not be with us here tonight, but he asked for me to tell you that he sends his condolences and that he is with us in spirit. Esther touched so many of our lives. We also had the opportunity to watch Orly grow from a young girl to a beautiful young lady, inside and out. Personally, I will always be thankful to both Esther and Orly for taking the time to help my own daughters with their Hebrew homework, and to Esther for all of her words of wisdom on how to help my own girls through day-to-day life. We will all remember Esther's beautiful smile, her great voice, her gorgeous hair, and the smells of her cooking, her caring, reassuring manner. I want to share with you just a few personal stories. One mother came up to me recently, and her daughter was in Esther's class a few years ago. And she shared with me one of her fond memories. She said, when I would come in the morning, my daughter Zoe would have a hard time. She's 3 years old. She'd have a hard time going into the classroom. And I would hold my baby Tegan, and I'd walk in the room, and Esther was always there. She would pick up Tegan and hold her in the hands and dance around with her while the mother helped her other daughters get ready for the day. Well, this year, Tegan, that same baby, is in Esther's class. And the mother told me that she only got to come in one time with her new baby. She has a new baby boy, and she said that often when she walks in now, she just imagines what it would have looked like to watch Esther hold baby Richmond so that she could go through that same morning ritual with Tegan, the one who had been in her arms 3 years prior. Another mom came up to me and she shared with me how she was always so thankful for Esther. She's talking about what can we learn from all of this. Well, I know when I look at Esther and I think about Esther, I have to just think to myself the importance of living every single day to its fullest, doing the best we can. And then the other thing that I really learned in the past few weeks is that with all these stories coming out, I learned how important it is that we reach out to those people we care, those people who have touched us in some way, and that we share those stories with them. And I hope that Esther was able to hear some of these stories and what they meant to these people who had come into contact. Don't wait. Just tell everybody how you feel and say thank you. Many of the stories I've heard in the last couple of weeks were new to me. All I hope is that they were not new to Esther. Every day some little item comes up and it leads my mind to Esther. And it's these little tiny things over and over that I imagine a lot of you in this room will just think of. One example is earlier last week, a teacher called me one evening, said she wasn't feeling well, and guess who our most reliable backup for opening our building was? Esther. So my brain went right to Esther. Of course, I could not call Esther. I was at Publix with my daughter, walking down the aisle, looking at marinara sauce. And I thought, Esther puts olives in her sauce. And I want to buy olives. Esther would want us to continue doing what she loved, and to taking care of the children, celebrating the holidays, singing, dancing, cooking, and moving forward. And so we must. We're beginning right now at the Jubo Preschool. We started our fall garden, something that Esther always took great initiative for and care of. And then last week, her granddaughter Lily attended our school the other day. It was so nice to see Esther's children and to meet Lily. And when they walked through the door, I was almost speechless. All I saw was a little mini Esther with a beautiful And Timmy, we are so honored that you entrusted us with Lily. It really made our day extra special. This past week we read stories about tzedakah and tikkun olam. The children created tzedakah boxes. This is a project that Esther would have led. It reminds me of Esther. She lived and breathed the values we teach every day. Her influence has put a lasting mark on our family, on my family, and all who have known her. Timmy, Alana, Michael, Norley, our teachers and parents have also come to me in great concern for you. You have been in our hearts and in our thoughts and prayers each day. Your mom's face would light up when she spoke about you. She always looked forward to her trips to Israel and would come home with such a glow of happiness. Please know that in the days and years ahead, how proud your mom was of each of you and how much she loved you. Also know that those of us who knew and loved your mom will also be here for you. Wow. Thank you.
I would be remiss if I were just to call up our next speaker without a proper introduction. See, every family usually has one child that is the driving force behind many things. In the Ohayon family, with regard to their journey and growth of Yiddishkeit, Simi played that role. One example, I remember her coming on Sunday mornings with Michael to Hebrew school. Even though she was older and more advanced than the others, she knew that Michael would probably not come if she wasn't there, so she came. And many of the paths she pursued and many of the challenges she overcame were accomplished by her own efforts. She was on a mission, and nothing and nobody could stop her. Baruch Hashem, her efforts paid off. Today, Simi and her husband Yosef are living a true Torah life and are blessed with a family of 5 children, K'nai Nahara. She has and continues to bring much nachas to her parents, her family, and community. Simi, you are a shining example to us all.
As the fast ended on Yom Kippur and we started Abdallah, my family and I received the tragic news of our loss. I was overwhelmed and confused. However, then I remembered those days, only 14 years ago, that feel like yesterday, that we lost our dear father, and we stood here. However, the community stood behind us and supported us with our loss. This gave me comfort to know that I would be going back to Jacksonville to be with my sister, knowing the community will be there next to us always. The community support in the past few weeks has been above and beyond tremendously warm. From the meals, to the hospital visits, to the listening ear, to the warm hug, we, the family, are at a loss for words to express our gratitude for your sympathy, kindness, and concern. You have given us comfort during our time of grief. We hope that we should only know joys of this in the future. Thank you.
She took everything in stride and of course, always with her precious smile. Esther will be sorely missed by many as she touched the lives of countless people on a personal level. How can we perpetuate Esther's memory? The next time you have a challenge, you're going through something, close your eyes and picture Esther's warm smile. Recite some Tehillim and act as Esther would have, in a positive fashion. I have no doubt that Esther, together with her husband Yehuda, are shaking the heavens for Mashiach to come, when we will once again be reunited with everyone. May it happen speedily in our days. Amen. There will be Myra services. The men would like to go out into the back room. Thank you all for coming.